Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reed Young for transformpoker.com. Today, I'm going to mess up the introduction here a little bit, but today we're going over a hand. I think it's a pretty cool spot because it shows us kind of some cool spots to avoid just thinking about game theory optimal play. So I know a lot of people have the tendency of getting wrapped up in, what's optimal, if you're balanced, when to use balance, and things like that. So it's definitely something I've noticed as players get better. They put more and more weight on balance until they reach some kind of like breaking point almost where they almost just start ignoring balance, and then it's about kind of finding a harmony between exploitive play and optimal play. So ideally what we want to do is maximally exploit our competition and in a way that they can't really pick up on it. So anyway, let's get to this hand here. So we're playing looks like six-handed. We're under the gun one with 8-7 suited. Oh, I'm sorry, no, we are the hijack. Under the gun one raises and we call. We're only 100 big blinds deep, so I think the call is a little loose. It's not bad, but I'd probably prefer just re-raising this hand if you were going to be playing it. So we flat, it's loose, and then the big blind comes along, so that's good. So part of the, I guess, impetus for calling the hand preflop seems to be that the big blind is just a huge fish. So he's playing every hand, and we anticipate multi-way action post-flop because of that. And I think actually like another thing you can think about is that the under the gun one raiser's range is going to be a little looser on average. So when you do flat more speculative hands than you might normally, it actually gives a very good squeezing opportunity for other players left in the hand who are kind of paying attention to what's going on, and if they think that both of you guys are capable of picking up on the big blind's play. So I'm not really a fan of playing overly loose in this situation, because when you're playing speculative hand, you want to be against a tight range, because when you hit, you want to get paid. And if you're against a loose range, your implied odds aren't as high. So we've kind of determined that the under the gun one player is a good player, as you can see from the reads that this poster wrote about. So he's a huge winner over a pretty big sample, and that means he's probably opening fairly widely here in an attempt to isolate the big blind, play a lot of heads up pots. Doesn't really matter what he has. Most of the time the big blind's going to be check folding at some point, more often than he should be against a loose range like the under the gun one opener should have. So I don't like the call. Again, preflop, I guess that's another more explained reason why. But anyway, so we're off to the flop. The big blind checks and the under the gun player continuation bets. Right away, I think we have a lot of information about how strong his range is just because of the big blind. Most players aren't going to be going overboard with a continuation bet frequency here because they know they're getting action from at least one of us. So there's not really much air that makes sense for him to have. It's, in other words, not going to be a profitable continuation bet a lot of the time if he just has like king 10 of diamonds, for instance. So I would expect the under the gun one player actually to be giving up here very often. And then when he does bet, it's quite indicative of a strong hand. So he bets, and we decide to call, which I think is fine. Keeping with that idea, keeping with the fact that if we raise, we're probably not going to be shoving over many 3-bet bluffs. And then when we do get it in, we're just racing or behind, very far behind always. So I don't really like the idea of raising the flop. Actually, a few posters said that it's a good idea to raise the flop, and it definitely can be. We don't flop this well that often, so raising to induce a bluff when a player might think we're just bluffing or that we have a set could be a good idea, because then we pick off a lot of 3-bet bluffs, and when we go all in on the flop, we actually get folds in a pretty big pot where we actually don't care that much if we get called. Like I said, we're just going to be racing most of the time against a hand like kings or aces. So we call the flop. I think it's also good. We get the big blind to come along pretty frequently as well, and he actually does. So 3-way to the turn, the big blind checks, and the under the gun one player pots it. So there's a few kind of conflicting ideas going on for us now. The best hand in our range really to call this is about the one that we have, unless we're slow playing preflop or we slow play to set on the flop, and neither of those are that likely on such a connected board texture. Usually on boards like this, you want to get the money in on the flop because you can represent a draw, you can represent a bluff very well, and there's a lot of scary turns and river cards that kill your action. So if the turn is like a 4, a 9, a spade, or a 7, which is, about half the deck already right there, it's going to greatly diminish the chances that you get all the money in against a hand like pocket queens. Even if he has like queens, you have to worry about a king or an ace as well, kind of scaring him off from value betting, or maybe he thinks that you have a nut flush draw or a king high flush draw and he ends up check folding at some point. So there's a lot of ways the hand can go poorly if you do have a strong hand, so most people do fast play it on the flop. So the bad thing about that is now our range is pretty face up on the turn is something like pocket sevens, and really that's essentially what we have right now with a little bit more equity. We have a few more outs to improve. So he pots it, which I think is a good size with all of his range, but again, I think the big blind player is going to let us get away with our get away from this spot, because against a range that's all overpairs, and then overpairs that don't block our straightening outs like pocket nines, we have 20% equity, and that's not great. So it's definitely not enough to be calling a turn bet. And even if we are assuming that the big blind comes along a large percentage of the time, the problem is that our outs aren't clean. So what that means is that if the big blind calls, it's very likely he has a hand like ace-7 or something like that that has a lot of the same outs that we have against the under the gun 1 player who's potting the turn, his range. So when the big blind does call, if we make a straight on the river, so did the big blind, and we only win half the pot. So our implied odds, the money that we stand to win if we do hit a draw, are not as high. Also, it's going to be pretty easy to tell for the under the gun 1 player when we do hit. A possible good thing to think about, I'm saying fold here if that wasn't clear, but a possible good thing that you could consider is that if you do call here, you might be able to represent spades on the river, and essentially the ability to represent outs in that way, what a lot of people call bluff outs, could give you enough folding equity, which is kind of just using a bluff profitably to create value from the pot. So if he folds a hand like queens on a 3 of spades river by check folding it a high percentage of the time, then perhaps turning a hand like 8-7 into a bluff is going to be a good source of value. So like we said, we actually don't have that many made hands that can continue on the turn. Even 8-7, quote unquote, should not continue. So if we do call on the turn, I think we have a pretty excellent chance of being able to represent a flush draw on the river. And then it also allows the big blind to come along with some weaker hands and sweeten the pot a little bit. So instead of shared outs, we're kind of more assuming that the big blind, who is a weaker player, is going to play his hand straightforwardly. And I think a lot of the time, a weaker player like that, when they do hit the flush on the river, they basically always lead out with it, unless they do kind of like a timing tell type thing and quickly check it. Like they're really excited, oh, they hit, now they're going to trap you. So it's pretty easy to tell when the big blind does have a flush. So if we get multi-way action on the turn, we can play pretty well on the river, and that's definitely something to look for in the calling camp. So because the under the gun 1 player is very good, I think calling the turn with the idea of representing a flush on the river could be a good idea and is certainly defensible, but without that, you're not going to have enough equity and you should be folding. So it's really all about how you think the possible river situations are going to play out and how much equity adding the ability to represent a flush on the river adds to your hand, to the value of your hand. So if you guys like this video, please share it with a poker buddy, and it helps our channel grow. We're almost at 700 subscribers. I can't thank you guys enough. It's awesome. We'll be cranking out videos for you guys. So we've been pretty busy with the site now, but we can be more consistent in the next week or so. So I will see you guys next time.